there was an interesting tweet that went out, and now it's actually been deleted. I tried to get it before we recorded here. Raj Giri of Wrestling Inc. went to Twitter, and he said that AEW needs to book Bryan Danielson and CM Punk like WWE books Brock Lesnar as a special attraction. Putting them on each and every week wrestling matches is not helping AEW. Do you agree with that statement?
Partially. I agree with parts of it. And this goes back to my original point at the beginning of this whole conversation that we're having right now. So WWE and AEW are very different companies with two very different goals and very different mindsets on how they're going to approach their programming. Mm-hmm. If you had a scale, it's no secret that WWE very much leans towards the sport entertainment aspect of it, and AEW certainly relies on more of the pro wrestling aspect of it. Mm-hmm. I think that with Brock Lesnar, like I've said throughout this whole conversation we've had, is more of a spectacle. Andre the Giant was a spectacle. Bruno Sammartino, even during this was before my time, but people went out of their way to experience a match with Bruno Sammartino. There's some special it factor that isn't necessarily related to promo skills or in-ring work. It's just they have an aura about themselves.
Right.
CM Punk and Bryan Danielson, they're pro wrestlers at heart, man. They are indie guys that like to work and rely on their technical abilities. CM Punk's going to walk into a bar. If he's CM Punk, he's going to blend in. He's an average sized guy.
Well, CM Punk is never going to be in a bar, I don't think. Well, at least he's not going to drink at the bar.
Okay. I don't care where you are. You could be at a tree lighting since it's almost Christmas time. But both of those guys are average sized guys, and they rely on their wrestling, their promo work, and all of that type of stuff. Like, they don't have that aura about themselves like an Undertaker, an Andre the Giant, a Brock Lesnar. So WWE books Brock the way that they should book Brock because he is a spectacle. He's an attraction. AEW is more of like punk rock, edgy content, and they fit perfectly within that. Do I think that they can book them a little bit better? And do I think that they should have throwaway matches every single week? Bryan Danielson, I don't necessarily have an issue with the way he's been booked because at least the matches he's had have been against guys within the Dark Order, and that's going to build towards a match that he's having with Hangman Page.
Right.
With CM Punk, I think there's a little more of a beef there because I don't think CM Punk should be going out there and having competitive matches with guys that either aren't ranked or certainly aren't on his level. I don't think that that CM Punk should struggle against a guy like what's his name? Lee
Moriarty.
Okay. He should not go out there and have a 10+ minute match against a guy like that.
But to Lee Moriarty's defense, though, he did rank higher than Seth Rollins in the PWI 500 list this past year.
Good for him. And if you were to ask every single pro wrestling fan on the face of the earth who Seth Rollins was and who Lee Moriarty were, no disrespect to him, guys are going to know who Seth is because he works in the promotion that has a much larger fan base. And the problem with Punk is...
But that's not fair to Lee Moriarty. He's younger and has less experience. He's not going to go quickly to WWE unless he's Rex Steiner, a.k.a. Braun Breaker.
But here's the thing. These are facts. Whether people want to admit this or not, CM Punk came from a company where he was on had a very prominent role in a very large wrestling organization or sports entertainment organization, whatever you want to call it. And he has a very large following. So, one of the things I've talked about in the past on this show is you're not just trying to convince the in crowd. And that by in crowd, I mean, the people that, Punk could go roll around in a pile of pig shit in the ring and they're still going to watch AEW every Wednesday night to be like, hey man, Punk was on some segment in AEW and yeah, we love this promotion. That's not really going to ensure you long-term success. Like, there's other fans out there, the disenfranchised fans that are no longer watching WWE that might give AEW a chance that you're trying to convince. Right. If they decide one night, hey, I heard Punk's wrestling tonight, let me watch this match. One of two things is going to happen. They're going to turn on that channel. They're going to watch that match hit with him and Lee
Moriarty.
Lee M. We're going to call him that. Lee M. So Lee M and CM Punk decide they're going to have a 10-minute competitive match. If you're a fan that does not watch AEW on a weekly basis, you're doing one of two things. You're saying, hey, this match was awesome, I'm going to watch next week, or you're saying, why is CM Punk struggling against this guy that I've never heard of?
If that's part of the CM Punk story right now, though. That's part of CM Punk's story,
This is the problem. This is the problem, though. This is the problem. I'm not talking about the in crowd right now. I'm talking about the lapsed fan, the fan that used to watch WWE, the fan that used to watch CM Punk on WWE programming that is giving this a chance now. They don't know the backstory. They don't know what's going to happen in the future. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to hang around for the 3-4 month journey to see CM Punk come to fruition, win a title or win a big match or whatever. CM Punk going out there and having a competitive match against a guy like Darby Allin, Eddie Kingston, by all means, go ahead and do that. But for him to go out there and struggle with guys like, let's just use like Daniel Garcia, young up and comer, a lot of potential.
Mm-hmm.
I get it. I get what they're trying to do. But you have to realistically look at that and say, long term, is this good for CM Punk? Is this good for AEW? Or is this some fans going to turn on our station and say, why is Punk struggling against this guy? Because we brought up Seth Rollins.
But I think people can now assume. Hold on. Let me just put this in before you finish. Isn't the fact that CM Punk hasn't wrestled for 7 years and people know that have to get fallen into the equation here, where even an unknown guy might have a little bit of an advantage, knowing that they're trying to make a name for themselves and beating a guy like CM Punk. Granted, he's been gone for 7 years. A win over him is great. So that's why it's a little bit more competitive.
No, not when he's already tested himself against guys like Darby Allin, who has had success in AEW, and guys like Eddie Kingston.
If the fan you're talking about did not watch the match with Darby Allin and did not watch the match with Eddie Kingston, and this is their first exposure with him back, don't you think that fan kind of is like, wow, CM Punk may have lost a step or two. Maybe he gets it back, maybe he doesn't. Let's see what happens next week. I'm not saying that's with everybody, but don't you think a viewer can think like that?
Well, I said that. I said you'll get one of two things. You'll get some fans that are going to say, wow, this was a great match. I love AEW. Maybe I'll start watching this content. Or they're going to say, why is Punk struggling against like that? And the other thing too, where was that match positioned on the show? Was it the main event? Was it the middle of the card?
It wasn't the main
event.
Of the night? It definitely wasn't the main event.
Okay. Is CM Punk not worthy of a main event on Dynamite?
Absolutely.
Like this is another issue. And I know you would probably like to elaborate on that before I give my thoughts on.
Yes, I definitely would, because I think if you talk about anything about the booking of Bryan Danielson and CM Punk, it's that, and this is really a fault to Tony Khan since the beginning of Dynamite, is that he puts on his big money match first or early on in the show, so that by the time the fans that want to see him, want to see CM Punk, want to see Bryan Danielson, and even Sting, when he first came back to AEW, when he was first coming out, it was always that first or second segment, and by the time those fans wanted to see them, they saw them and they tuned out. The thing that everyone was talking about on the Thanksgiving Eve episode of Dynamite was MJF and CM Punk. Now, that was a promo, and that was one of the rare occasions it started Dynamite with a promo. And that was the most talked about thing for the weekend. It trended on YouTube.
Yeah.
Everyone was talking about it.
Yep.
It was the first thing they saw on the show. I bet you a majority of those people tuned out because they got what they wanted and they're done. So what does that mean? Average viewership, average ratings, they decline throughout the night because they already got what they wanted. If they did it backwards, if they did it where the QT Marshall CM Punk match main evented, quote unquote, the night, and then MJF comes out after the match and they have that 20-minute segment, you leave them with, holy shit, that was awesome, I want more, but the show is over, so then that carries over to next week.
Yes.
That there, I think, is a problem that Tony Khan has.
Well, yeah, and when you compare it to let's say like a legitimate sport, like a UFC, MMA, boxing, any of that, everybody knows that the main event or the most important segment or match or fighter is going to go on last. You know, right. Conor McGregor is a huge draw. His ability to sell pay-per-views is second to none to anybody in the UFC right now. And that's with him coming off essentially losing streak. Like he hasn't won a meaningful fight in a very long time.
Right.
That being said, they've offered him contracts where essentially he was going to be a co-main event, not even close the night, and he turned it down. And that just goes to show you how important it is for certain guys to close the night out. So subliminally, you're kind of reverse engineering trying to reverse engineer everybody's mindset when they know, by comparison to UFC, to MMA, to boxing, Floyd Mayweather is not going to go out there and open a prelim fight. Conor McGregor is not going to go out there and open a prelim fight.
Right.
CM Punk going out there and opening the night. Yes, it's okay, I guess. But at the same time, you're telling the fans, again, the fans that aren't going to watch every single week, a fan that's giving it a chance, that CM Punk is opening the night. And at some point, are some of those fans going to say, okay, well, there's not as much value to CM Punk. Like, this is what he's reduced to, kind of opening the night against some guy that nobody's really heard of. So, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but there's definitely fans out there who are going to interpret that way, I would imagine.
Right. And I understand, people say if you don't go on last, you want to go on first. And that's totally fine. The opening segment is very important, but also compare it to what happens at the rest of the night. Now, this past Wednesday's Dynamite, I believe, opened with Bryan Danielson and Alan Angels. And it closed with Cody and Andrade in their no-holds-barred match or whatever. If I'm, as a fan of AEW, when I see those two matches, even though it's Bryan Danielson versus Alan Angels, I want to see that match because, one, there's a good story behind it with Danielson leading up to Hangman Page, and two, he's the bigger star right now over Cody and Andrade. So that kind of, and and also the fact that Bryan Danielson is the number one contender, have that. But I also understand Cody's the hometown guy, and Cody's still a main factor in AEW and whatnot. So it's not a terrible decision, but you could definitely reverse those two spots.
Yeah, that to me makes sense because, like you said, there is a story there with him going and beating those guys, and it plays into the whole thing with him saying he's going to kick people's heads in, and he's working his way up to the match with Hangman Page, essentially beating all of Hangman Page's friends and doing it in embarrassing fashion. So I don't have a problem with that. I just think that for CM Punk to go out there and have these competitive matches, while I understand the argument that people are going to make that he's been gone for 7 years and there's a struggle and he's got to get his feet back underneath him, I don't have a problem with it, but I think that at the same time, he should be reserved for matches that are going to be more meaningful. I'd rather have him go out there and have a back and forth conversation with a guy like MJF than see him have a competitive match against a guy that's young and up and coming, because there's other guys in the AEW roster that those matches can happen with. Jay Lethal, by example, is he ranked? No, but he's very good in the ring. So those types of matches for guys make sense, especially because AEW does cater more to the pro wrestling heavy preferred fan.
Based on the comment that Raj Giri made, does CM Punk need to be booked better? Does Bryan Danielson need to be booked better? Do they need to be booked like Brock Lesnar? I think in some cases, yes, because they are, to the pro wrestling fan, they are special attractions. You want to see them wrestle. But if they're just going out there every week and doing the same thing and against guys that aren't necessarily household names yet, it kind of devalues them. That's the problem I think I have. Now, when you have Bryan Danielson facing Hangman Page for a title match at Winter is Coming, that's huge. That's like, damn, I want to see that now.
Yeah.
If I see Bryan Danielson each week going against Daniel Garcia, then he faces Lou Moriarty, then he faces Joe Schmo, Jane Doe, whoever else, and then it just kind of devalues him because it just looks like he's just padding wins for the rankings. And that goes into another argument.
There's clear differences in both companies, and comparing Brock Lesnar to these guys, I don't think it's necessarily fair, because I go back to my original argument here that I think that Brock is more of a spectacle. If there's anybody else coming into WWE at any point that I think can be treated similar to Brock, is Walter. I think Walter can be that spectacle that they're kind of looking for. Where when I look at Bryan Danielson and when I look at CM Punk, they're more, even at heart, I think they're more pro wrestling. They're pro wrestlers like that. Right. That's their attraction. They cut good promos. They have a good character. They go out there and they have great matches, no matter if it's a guy that's on, ranked, unranked, whatever it may be. That's their strength. And asking them to be booked like Brock Lesnar, I don't think is fair, because I don't think they have the same appeal as a Brock Lesnar, so to speak.
I agree. Part 1 of this conversation answers the question, who's the bigger star, Brock Lesnar or CM Punk? Click the thumbnail on the screen right now, subscribe, hit that bell for notifications, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Squared Circle Psychobabble.